Well, just after Christmas, a man named Richard Overton died at the young age of 112. Here's a picture of Mr. Overton. At the time before his death, for the previous 3 years, he was the oldest living American World War II veteran. There was a documentary that was done at the time this picture was taken. He was only 109 at that time, and I think it was the National Geographic that did the documentary and the interview, and they showed him. He was still pretty spry, driving around his 1980s pickup truck and taking his girlfriend places, like to church. So, if any of you are looking for like a boyfriend, you've got to expand your age boundaries on that, maybe. But I don't know how old she was. There wasn't anything that I could find about that. But at any rate, in that documentary, it talked about Mr. Overton and his life, and he enjoyed smoking cigars and drinking whiskey. And he said, though, you can't inhale those cigars. That's bad for you. So he was quite the fella. And even though he was in the documentary not just for being old, but because he was the oldest World War II veteran, he didn't talk much about World War II and about his experience there. About all he said was, it wasn't good, but we had to go. And that's pretty similar to the attitude of a lot of the World War II veterans that I've known. My dad served in World War II, and it was, well, they had a job to do. None of them enjoyed it. They didn't enjoy being away from their families, from their loved ones. They didn't want to put their lives on the line, but they knew they had to. And as a result, that generation of men and women who went also saved the world. You think about it, they did an amazing thing in winning World War II. Oh, by the way, Caden, I just wanted you to know that was a Ford pickup truck that he drove, and it was a 1980, so it was over 30 years old and looked nearly brand new. So Caden and I have this thing that he's a Chevy lover, and I kind of drive Fords. And
like you're actually ugly. It's like you look at a Chevy, like a Silverado, they're nice looking.
Rust isn't that great looking, Caden. Anyway, we kibitz about that back and forth going to youth group and from youth group sometimes, but at any rate. So, but I don't ever team up with Bob and get on me about Fords, though, because he doesn't like Fords either. So, at any rate, but Mr. Overton didn't, like the rest of the World War II veterans that I've known, didn't really seek honors or rewards for what they did. They knew that it was a job, it was their duty, and they did it. Well, in this morning's parable, Jesus spoke about a servant, or more accurately, the word in Greek that's used there is doulos, which is a slave. Not just a hired servant, but an owned slave who had been working out in the field all day. And in Jesus' day, nobody would have expected that slave to get any special treatment or receive any kind of thanks after they'd gotten in from their day's work in the field. And the slave wouldn't have expected to be waited on by the master when he or she came in for the evening, But they would have expected, okay, it's going to be my job to get cleaned up, get supper made, serve the master, and then I'll be able to eat and rest. And nobody in Jesus' day would have expected that slave to be thanked for what he or she did. And Jesus ended that parable by saying, so you also, when you have done everything you were told to do, should say, we are unworthy servants, we have only done our duty. Now this picture, maybe some of you have seen it before. These are a bunch of ladies. The Historical Society in Door County, Wisconsin, when we were on vacation up there, had a fish boil, and these ladies were serving the desserts. And they weren't getting paid for it. It was just, they felt like it was their duty to work to preserve the historical places and historical facilities up there in Door County. And so it was, they felt, their duty to make pies and serve pies and be part of that thing. And they were very friendly ladies. We didn't talk about football. So, at any rate, if when you hear Jesus' parable that Jackie read and that I'm talking about this morning, you might be tempted to think, well, maybe it's about Jesus saying that people shouldn't receive thanks or recognition for what they do. It's true that Jesus taught about and lived humility. That was what he was about, but he didn't say that people shouldn't be recognized for their work and that they shouldn't be rewarded for hard work. Thankfulness was important to Jesus because just a few verses later, there were 10 lepers that came to Jesus and asked him to heal them. Well, he told them to go and show themselves to the priests, and as they did what he told them to do, they were healed. And one of the 10, who happened to be a Samaritan, came running back and fell at Jesus' feet. And when he saw, that's because he saw that he had been healed, and he praised God, and Jesus asked, were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner? So, being thankful and giving thanks are important to Jesus. So he isn't saying that people shouldn't be thankful and thank others. Now Jesus did teach his followers that they shouldn't seek or insist on getting recognition and thanks for the things that they've done. Just like Shay said, that would be rude. After all, Jesus taught that when you go to a banquet, you shouldn't right away go to the most prominent seat and try to be noticed as somebody important. If you do that, some more important person might come, and as it says here, but when you're invited, go sit in the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher, then you'll be honored in the presence of all who sit at table with you. So humility, again, was what Jesus really was all about. But Jesus, I think, had something more specific when he talked about the importance of doing your duty. Now, I kind of sneaked up on you, but the few verses right before I had Jackie start reading, there were 2 things that were involved there. And duty here on this next slide is represented as a big, strong guy lifting a heavy weight, because often doing our duty is a hard thing. And Jesus had been teaching about 2 specific things. The first was forgiveness when someone sins against you. Okay, and there's forgiveness on one side of the barbell, and having faith. Those 2 things are things that a lot of times we humans find pretty difficult. Yet they are things that we are supposed to do. God isn't going to come and pat us on the head or give us some outstanding award for doing those things, but I'd like to talk about them individually, starting with forgiveness. Right before telling this parable, Jesus said, "Take heed to yourself. If your brother sins against you, rebuke him. And if he repents or turns around, comes and says, 'I'm sorry,' forgive him. And if he sins against you 7 times in a day, and 7 times in a day returns to you saying, 'I repent,' saying, 'I'm sorry,' you shall forgive him." Now it's worded, "you shall," because in Greek it's an imperative. And if you remember anything from your grammar in school, an imperative means that this is a command. You must forgive someone who asks that forgiveness from you. So that is the first thing that Jesus says, this is your duty. When somebody hurts you and apologizes, it is your duty to forgive. Now, I've talked about forgiveness before, and I want to do a quick review of the nature of forgiveness, because there are some times that people say glib and unhelpful things like, well, just forgive and forget. It's not that easy, because forgiveness, when somebody has really hurt you, I'm not talking about if somebody bumps you in a crowd or steps on your foot or does some insignificant little thing like that. When somebody really hurts you and does the kind of thing that causes wounds and scars for years, it's like facing a huge cliff and having to climb to the top. Forgiveness like that can be really, really hard. That is a difficult thing to do. But again, Jesus said this is something you must do. First, it's important to remember that forgiveness is a process. If you can't read that, you just have to turn your head a little bit and read it at an angle. Forgiveness is a process. It's not a one-time snap thing. Forgiveness is done when you've really been hurt and it's all over and done with. That is shortchanging the whole forgiveness process. There are a number of steps that need to be gone through in order for forgiveness to be complete. The second point related to that is that forgiveness takes time. If you've really been hurt, forgiving somebody can take years to get it accomplished. And it can take years before that sense of peace and contentment fully returns. Also, forgiveness doesn't just happen accidentally. The process of forgiveness, like the proverbial journey of 1,000 miles, begins with a single step, with a deliberate step, with an act of will, a decision to forgive. And just like that proverbial journey, forgiveness requires persistence. It takes daily decisions to let go of anger, to forgive, to make things right and let go of what you need to forgive. Now, if the forgiveness process is your duty and my duty, you might ask, wait a minute, why is it our duty? Why doesn't God thank me for forgiving somebody? After all, it feels so good when you've been hurt to be angry at somebody, doesn't it? That just feels good to let that anger eat away and boil inside of you. But that doesn't do you any good. The one who receives the most benefit when you forgive someone is you. If you hold on to anger and unforgiveness towards someone, it really doesn't hurt them much. They may not even be aware that you're angry at them, or they might not even care to know that you're angry at them. When I was a district superintendent, it seemed like I always had somebody mad at me, right? There were congregations like this. I want a different pastor. We want a different pastor. And there were times when a pastor in a congregation would be butting heads all the time, and the bishop would say, I think we need to leave that pastor there for another year and let them work on settling their disagreements themselves. We can't fix that. And when I go tell them, oh man, there were people that were mad at me. You would think they were going to take torches and storm the castle right at that point. Or other times when a beloved pastor had been someplace for 5 or 10 years, and the bishop said, we need that person's gifts and graces at this other church over here to help them take the next step. And sometimes people would get furious that their beloved pastor was being stolen by the annual conference, and I was the one that had to tell them, and so the district superintendent ends up taking the heat again. And there were times that pastors would be angry with me. Why didn't I get the appointment to that big church with the higher salary? How come I'm stuck where I am? There was one pastor that said, I need to be at one of those big shoulder churches. I don't know what a big shoulder church exactly is. But there was always things like that, or it really was rough if you had to appoint a pastor to a smaller church with a lower salary than what they were used to. Again, there are no nooses that are shown in here, but there were some pastors that would gladly strung me up when that kind of stuff happened. After I did that job for about a year, I just came to the decision that it was tearing me up inside when all these people were angry at me, and so I just had to say, okay, I'm going to do the best job that I can. And if people are upset at me for that, then they're just going to have to be upset, and they're going to have to work on their relationships between pastors and people in the church themselves. And there's some stuff that I just can't fix. Your lack of forgiveness and the anger that results only hurts you. Look at this slide. You got this guy that's angry at Bob. And then you've got Bob down there in the lower right corner. That's not your Bob, obviously. Even though you might be happy to wake up and have him look like that guy some morning. No, you wouldn't. Okay. At any rate, but you look at that. Who's in the most turmoil here? The guy that's angry at Bob or Bob? Obviously, the guy that's angry is the one that's going to get ulcers out of this situation. Bob's not bothered. He sleeps good at night, while the other guy fusses and fumes and tosses and turns at night being angry about something that Bob did. Now, even if he's maybe justified, we would say, being angry at Bob, holding on to that anger is not good for him. It doesn't hurt Bob a bit. God doesn't reward you for forgiving any more than God rewards you for eating healthy food or drinking clean water. Must be a mother-daughter joke there. Okay, at any rate. Now, the other thing that God won't pat us on the head for is having faith in God. God may be moved by our faith. Events can be affected when we put our faith into action. And Jesus said, with even a little bit of faith, as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mulberry tree, be pulled up by the roots and be planted in the sea, and it would obey you. Faith can do amazing things. But, again, it is our duty, our responsibility to have faith in God, to trust that things are going to work out okay, that God will help us work to set things right when we can. But without God's grace, even our faith wouldn't have any effect. Now, giving and receiving thanks is great, but there are some things that we just have to do for our own good. I think that's why Jesus said, so you also, when you have done everything you were told to do, should say, we are unworthy servants. We have only done our duty. So I hope that all of you are doing the things that you're supposed to do. Thanks be to God. Amen and amen.